Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Bjorn.
And we're Viking Age reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking shows.
We have finally made it to the season finale of the series finale of Vikings, episode 20.
Before we jump into tonight's episode, we had a couple of updates for you regarding our channel. So because we are finishing up this series in the season, next we are planning on moving on to Vinland Saga, which is something that people have been asking us to react to since channel's inception for more than a year. But in order to do that, we are going to have to take about a week or two off of uploading our regular videos on the channel, and that is because we are going to try and do the reactions live on Twitch, and we're trying to figure out a set time and day for that. We might be taking on a couple of episodes at a time because I think they're fairly short episodes, and we don't want to spend half a year on it. So we're going to do the reactions live for those of you who want to join us for that, and then we will either talk about it live and then upload those talking points to YouTube for everyone else to watch, or we'll film the talking points separately and upload those to YouTube for everyone to watch.
Yep.
And with that, let's do this.
This is an extreme punishment, but under the circumstances I do think that it is appropriate. So that, thief, murderer, I sentence you to be bloody. Agreed. Agreed. You don't understand. Uber has given you the opportunity to go to VALHALLA.
Okay, so we're back to the Blood Eagle. The Blood Eagle is something that we talked about once in the past, I think, when we were talking about Norsemen, when it was brought up there. It's not a practice that we know a lot about or is mentioned a lot, if any, in fact.
We have a few accounts from the time period. I think there's only like 2 or 3 actual mentions in the Viking Age from writing from then. And then there's a couple others that kind of build off of those earlier writings, and then that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
We don't really know if it was an actual practice, how often it happened, if it did at all. And a lot of it seems to kind of be almost exaggerated from earlier accounts as well. So it's a little bit iffy, if that.
Yeah, I mean, the main account that a lot of people talk about is when Ivar and his brothers came over to England with the Great Heathen Army, and the way that it's written is that they carved the eagle in King Aila's back when they killed him. It says nothing about ripping open his back and taking out, the lungs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And we only really get that kind of description from accounts later on describing what it was, which is still not appropriate to the time frame and to the time period and everything. So we really don't have a lot to go on at all. Interesting note though to make on this. So there's a researcher at the University of Iceland, Luke John Murphy, and he actually collaborated with some medical professionals to see if the blood eagle is like a possible thing to even do to a human body. He talked about it on the Nordic Mythology podcast. So definitely worth checking out that one from a few weeks ago, because it's a brilliant discussion that they had. But generally they found out that while it's sort of possible to do to a human body, it's definitely not possible to live through it longer than like 30 seconds at most.
Yeah.
So this whole idea where you have to not make a sound and take it all, in stride to enter Valhalla, that was entirely made up for the show. That was never really like a part of the actual practice. But it seems like if it was to be an actual thing that did take place, it seems to largely be having it done to a corpse. Like you're pretty much going to be dead the entire time for as long as it takes to do what you're going to do. You'd actually die very quickly.
be afraid.
He brought a knife to a sword fight. That's cute. That's an intense scene right there. I love it and I hate it at the same time.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I love some of the movements that they did when he kind of like wades into battle and kind of like takes on that centerpiece figurehead of it kind of.
Yeah.
And they have him like almost like commanding all the other Vikings and stuff that he like chooses, almost like a puppeteer.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a really cool effect to do, like trying to make him seem like a descendant of Odin, you know, like a god of war kind of thing, where he like choreographs the battlefield, you know, and like commands the will of others to kill. That was a really cool effect that that they did with that leading up to it.
Yeah, that was intense.
Yeah. The rest of it.
However, no, just the fact that he runs out onto the battlefield and yells his speech and then just allows somebody to kill him, like doesn't even try fighting back, and it's this dude with like the smallest little dagger imaginable in the fight.
It's not about the size. It's how you use it.
Clearly. He was so mortified to find himself in front of me.
Yeah, I think he was just as surprised as the rest of us were, ultimately said and done.
We've talked about his death before. Historically speaking, we believe that he was dead by around 873. His death is attested in multiple sources. In one of the sources, it's 870. In two other sources, it's 873. There is also mention that he might be the same person as Imar that is written in Irish history, and he dies in 873. The reason why people think that Imar and Ivar are the same person, on top of sharing very similar names, it's also that he kind of disappears off the pages of Irish history around the same time that he is in England, fighting against King Alfred. So people kind of tend to believe that those are the same people, just kind of jumping through history books back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, it's speculative, but it's definitely a theory out there.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, his death on a battlefield, his bones failing him, is a theory to how he died in the first place and how he got his nickname. It's one of the theories to how he got his nickname. Is it's said that it might be an illness that he developed at the end of his life that failed him. But again, there's multiple theories to exactly how his life was led.
Exactly, yeah. Ultimately, we don't know. But dying on a battlefield in England is definitely up
One
there
of
in
them,
the realm of possibility.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in the realm of probability, you know. I am also confused, just to say, of him kind of teary-eyed saying this is his time to die, and then immediately going to a speech about how he can't die, and then letting somebody kill him. And then, like, being afraid. Like, I hate that his last words were, "I'm afraid." It doesn't make any sense to me, ultimately. I kind of get how it personifies him a little bit and makes him seem more like a person than, like, the god or, you know, whatever fierce warrior that he had been his whole life, essentially.
Right.
So it gives a little bit of a softer side to it, but none of it adds up.
You entered here as a pagan, and you will leave here as a Christian Saxon prince. As your godfather, I've chosen a new name for you. From now on, you'll be known as Athelstan.
There it
our
is.
brother in Christ.
Alright, so we know the name Athelstan from earlier. We know it from Ragnar's bromance from season 1 with the priest that he brought back as a slave.
Yep.
But so this whole thing though is pretty accurate to history, except that it wasn't Vitsark.
Right.
It was actually a guy named Guthrum. I don't think we saw him in the show at all. Guthrum was actually a very prominent Viking raider, and he actually led the Great Summer Army, the kind of reinforcement to the Great Heathen Army from earlier. And after the Battle of Edmonton in 878, he was actually forced to go into the Christian faith and be baptized, taking on a new Christian identity under the name of Athelstan. And Alfred the Great actually was the one who oversaw it as part of their peace treaty and actually did become his godfather.
And this was, in fact, the start of the Danelaw in England. Guthrum/Athelstan then went on to rule over the kingdom of East Anglia. And I think for about a decade, this gave way to this, like, peace, or as much of a peace as you could have in England of the time.
Very rocky peace.
Yeah. I mean, he basically became Alfred's man. It wasn't the end of the Viking Age by any means then, but it was that little bit of that peaceful period that happened.
Yeah. Now, Witzlik, on the other hand, we've said this in the past, we don't know a lot about the historical Witzark, but we do know that he actually left England, and it was said in the sagas, and I think also the primary chronicles, that he actually went east to be with the Rus people, and he raided with them before he ultimately met his end on a battlefield there.
Right. So they kind of flipped his story around a little bit. He was with the Rus first, and then he went to England.
Yeah, exactly.
King Harold was slain in the battle. And also Ivar the Boneless.
Ivar?
Alright, I feel like we have to say something about Kattegat here, even though we got about a minute of screen time.
We'll probably talk more about it than they did.
Most likely. That was a very quick wrap-up. Yeah, I mean, basically, a messenger comes back, says that everyone dies, and then they have a queen on the throne. That's not how history works, I don't think.
I don't know, it just seems so monumentally bland. What I do know is what actually happened in history. So, when Harold died at the ripe old age of 90-something, he had actually been sort of co-ruling with his son Eric Bloodaxe. And so when Harold died, Eric Bloodaxe took the throne for himself.
Right.
Now Eric got his name Bloodaxe from killing a bunch of his brothers to make his claim stronger. And once he took the throne, he ended up going to war with a couple of his other half-brothers and killing all of them and securing all of Norway under his own rule. This made him very unliked, and it didn't help the fact that he was a horrible, cruel person. So ultimately, he actually got removed from the throne, and he was kind of forced into an exile by one of his younger, very well-known half-brothers, Håkon. He kind of came back to Norway, and with the support of the other nobility, they completely drove him from the throne, and he was forced to seek exile in Northumbria, where he was kind of king of Northumbria for a time. I'm not necessarily faulting this for it being historically inaccurate. You know, everybody loves a good rags to riches story, because she was literally like a slave 4 months ago or something.
Right.
Who even knows? And we try not to talk about like the writing in the show, because it's not really like what we try to focus on. But like for it being like the capital of all of Scandinavia in the show, pretty much. You know, like I feel like there should have been something more intriguing that like ended the storyline there, not just like, oh well, yep, she's queen. It's like, yeah, we knew that a while ago. Now she knows it. Cool.
So we've talked the last couple of weeks about the conflicts that the Norse had with Native Americans when they got to America. And I feel like these are the stories that we can get a little bit deeper into when we watch the spin-off show that's going to be coming out on Netflix, because I feel like we're going to see a little bit more of that with the spin-off show, and also the fact that we're going to be watching Vinland Saga soon is going to be great. As we mentioned before, nothing that they're showing here is really written in the sagas. This is just pure made-up story that they're kind of going off of, but nothing really that jumps out at me as this was definitely not historically accurate, at least on the Viking side. I don't really know about the Native American side. I don't know about the the cremation burial that just happened or the face paint or anything like that. I don't know enough about the Native American side of history to really speak to that specifically.
Yeah, unfortunately, neither do I either.
But what we do know from the sagas is that the Vikings actually didn't really stay in America for long at all. There were a few expeditions that were undertaken by multiple people, but ultimately they did have to leave, and that had to do with the conflicts that they ran into with the Native Americans, and also just the fact that they were so separated from the mainlands and the people that they knew, that ultimately was not sustainable. They couldn't bring over hundreds and hundreds of people to North America to try and sustain those villages that they were trying to build, basically. So ultimately they just had to up and leave.
Yeah.
It was a very anticlimactic end.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, yeah, you're right.
So enjoy Valhalla, brother. While it still exists. We can all see the sky darkening. We can all see the twilight of the gods. In any case, I'll be dead soon. Is that the end?
Yeah, and to kind of continue from that too is like this show is like constantly hinting at this being like the end of the Viking Age, and in history and in the show, that's not really the case because like the Vikings are still around.
Right.
You know, in here, it's not like they went anywhere necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
There's real no indication that they'd stop raiding. You know, just the main ones that we've been following have kind of been offed or just kind of gone into a more lax lifestyle. But even in history, you know, the end of the Viking Age as we know it didn't mean the end of the Vikings. You know, we know in our history books, it's time-stamped as end of the Viking Age is 1066, with the Battle of Stamford Bridge being like the last Viking raid. And yeah, that was like the last main Viking raid, I guess you could say. But it's not to say that, that kind of behavior didn't perpetuate for decades or technically hundreds of years afterwards, and it's much more of like a gradual fade out and assimilation than what we think of it as.
Mm-hmm.
As the people began to assimilate with other cultures and create new lives for themselves like elsewhere and created family ties, both on the kind of lower peasant end as well as the higher nobility end. And it also had to do with the massive exchange of transforming your culture from a heathen religion into a Christian one, where you begin to kind of have all these extra external ties and friendships and business dealings essentially with other nations. This was a thing that had happened over hundreds of years. Really, it wasn't anything that we can timestamp to say, yep, this is exactly where it ended.
Right.
This is the split. This is the divide. In a very different way, the show still kind of showed that as well.
Yeah, it does show a little, the little bit of that assimilation happening, the Christianity creeping in, the conflicts that it causes and everything like that.
Yeah.
But even with the England story arc, we're leaving it with the start of the Danelaw, and that's nowhere near the Battle of Stamford Bridge. There's still so much that needs to happen there.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what the spin-off show is going to tackle, is that next step in the process.
Yeah, very true. We do know, like, ultimately places like Greenland in America were abandoned because they were too small and too remote to continually supply or to send people over there to. It was too much of a dangerous journey, and there was just not enough reward or benefit. But I definitely think we're going to start to see that the more legitimate shifting of political ties and influence as we go on to the Netflix series. That's it, man. That's the whole series. Done.
Wow. How long has it been since the series started?
Years. Too long.
It's been like a decade?
I think it's been almost a legitimate decade.
Wow.
It's the end of an era, ultimately. I mean, it got a lot of people interested in Vikings. I will say that much. And for good or for bad, it it did that. But they hit a lot of points. I don't know. We'll have to like go through and do like a best of almost, I feel like, just from like each season, because they definitely did hit really interesting aspects of Viking history, or just provided in their weird, twisted, ridiculous roundabout plot some cool facets of, or like some of the most intriguing parts of different sagas that are kind of lesser known and everything. And I really do appreciate that they kind of showed that off, I guess.
Yeah, we might have to do like a best and worst stuff of each season. Looking back on it, honestly, I feel like Vikings is a show that started off as pretty decent from the beginning, like the first 3 seasons or so, and then I took a nosedive into, I don't even know what, like full fantasy mostly.
Yeah.
This season kind of pulled it a little bit farther out of that fantasy bucket, but there's still a lot in here that's not sourced from history, which I'm not totally mad about. I feel like they did a pretty good job about it.
Yeah, I'm not mad about it either. Like, if they're trying to just make their own Viking show with their own plot, their own storyline, everything, that's totally fine. You can still approach it from a historically accurate standpoint. But it's not like they were ever trying to recreate the sagas.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
at least in this story arc.
Yeah.
Because they definitely, absolutely tried to recreate the sagas, and all of them at once, within the span of a generation or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
I
is
mean,
why I do get
ultimately-
mad about that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this story was about Ragnar and his sons.
Yeah.
That's all it was. That was our main cast, is Ragnar and his sons. And in that respect, they did some things right and they did some things wrong. I'm sure we'll continue talking about it a little bit more in depth as we go on.
Yep.
That's a yikes for me, dog.
It's gonna be a yikes for me.
So before we jump into the steps, done.
Let's check it out.
I tried. Goodbye.
Goodbye. I just figured we replace you with a bottle of wine. I just continually drink from and get more and more sloshed and just ranty.
The wisdoms of Bjorn.
The sayings of the drunk one.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we'll see you in the next one.